So today we're going to talk about how the nervous system is divided into different parts. People like to divide and classify the nervous system in different ways, and we'll talk about those classification systems and how they're used in combination to describe different parts of the nervous system. So the nervous system is commonly divided in a multitude of ways. The easiest, one most of us are familiar with, is the central nervous system versus the peripheral nervous system, CNS versus PNS, are the acronyms. But in addition to these, there's a number of subdivisions. So anatomical divisions, functional divisions, and developmental divisions. So let's look at all of these. So the most basic division that many of us are familiar with is CNS versus PNS. And in this simple schematic, the CNS is here, everything in purple, and it's the brain and the spinal cord. Pretty simple. The PNS is everything in blue. It's essentially everything else. So the peripheral nervous system includes both autonomic and somatic classifications, sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions, and sensory and motor efferent divisions. So you can see these are all different ways of dividing up this really big anatomically peripheral nervous system. An important point before we go any further is that the term brain is inclusive, right? So a lot of people, if we look over here, conflate the cerebral hemispheres with the brain. So they might call this the brain or this the brain and forget about all of this. So the cerebellum, the diencephalon, the brainstem, which includes the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata, all are included in the brain. The brain is an inclusive term. So remember that before we go any further. So the second way the brain is commonly divided is anatomically, the anatomical divisions of the brain. And both PNS and CNS can be divided anatomically, but this schematic is showing some divisions, anatomical divisions of the central nervous system. So we can see in this schematic, here's the central nervous system, CNS. It's grossly divided, as we've already said, into brain and spinal cord. And then if we take the brain itself, in this schematic, it's been split into the forebrain, the cerebellum, and the brainstem, and so on. And so these are all anatomical divisions of the CNS. There's a number of anatomical regions here numbered. If you want a little practice review activity of the brain, you could practice naming the anatomical division associated with each number. Now, third way the brain's divided, are we on third? 3, CNS, PNS, anatomical, and functional. Functional classifications of the nervous system are historically motor-centric. And this is a good example of that. So, for example, if we take the nervous system, divide CNS versus PNS, then we can further divide the peripheral nervous system into sensory and motor. And then all of a sudden you can see, oh, we've lost the sensory system for the rest of the function, right? So motor functions, then they've divided into somatic and autonomic, and they divided autonomic into sympathetic and parasympathetic. But we've kind of lost the sensory system for the remainder of the classification. This is a more recent scheme, and it divides the nervous system, that's the peripheral nervous system, into motor and sensory first, right? So I would call this peripheral nervous system here. They've called it nervous system, but that's fine. And so we've got the sensory system and the motor system, transmits information to CNS, sends information from CNS. And then in each category, they've split somatic and visceral, right? It's just another type of functional classification. What that functional classification is missing is sort of a third division, which you're going to hear functionally, which is the enteric nervous system. So this is an enteric nervous system is embedded in the walls of the intestines, the digestive tract, and it's absolutely huge, contains about 500 million neurons, and that includes sensory and motor and interneurons, stretching the entire length of the digestive tract. And the neurons of the enteric system are embedded in the wall of the digestive tract. So they're in these plexes that are embedded. You can see this is a cross section of the digestive tract, and it's got a mucosal layer and 2 layers of muscle. And in between these three layers, you find the extensive enteric nervous system. So the enteric nervous system is sort of a new functional classification that's been layered on more recently. And we now know the enteric system is absolutely crucial for maintaining health, and it's involved in disease. Now, there's sort of a final way to classify the nervous system, and that's based on embryonic development. So you'll hear these terms as well. In embryonic development, this is a human embryo in lateral view here that we're looking at on the left-hand side of the slide. And you can see he's folded over. So the neural tube in development swells up, creates these vesicles, these swellings, and then it flexes. It flexes at the front to fit our big brain into our relatively little skull. And so the prosencephalon is sort of the anterior bit, and then we have a mesencephalon and a rhombencephalon, and they're separated by these flexures. And so the prosencephalon, or the forebrain, is here, mesencephalon, rhombencephalon. And these three swellings or vesicles give rise to all of these structures in the brain.